Welcome to a new episode of the Animal Liberation Hour, where we seek insight from animal rights and liberation activists around the world so that we can think, reflect, learn, and be inspired together. My name is Shreya, and this is the Animal Liberation Hour. This podcast is brought to you by Animal Activism Mentorship. AAM's mission is to grow and strengthen the animal rights movement by providing a space for activists to have access to a community and various educational resources. From one-on-one mentorship to free workshops and trainings to this podcast, AAM aims to empower humans to take action for the animals so that we can create a kind, just, and equitable world for all creatures. For more information, visit animalactivismmentorship.com or our Linktree, which you can find in the show notes. There, you can sign up for a free mentor, keep up with all things AAM, and donate so that we can continue this important work for the animals. Today, I am excited to chat with my good friend and fellow animal advocate, Maddie Krasno. Passionate about primate conservation and eager to follow in the footsteps of Dr. Jane Goodall, Maddie took a job as an animal caretaker in a primate research lab during her college days at the University of Wisconsin Madison. This experience led her to question the exploitation of animals in science and beyond, and to pursue a career in animal protection. Maddie also holds a master's degree in humane education. She has spent the last decade working for animal sanctuaries and wildlife rehabilitation nonprofits in a variety of capacities, including animal care, outreach and education, curriculum development, and fundraising. Currently, Maddie is the Grants and Foundation Specialist for Woodstock Farm Sanctuary, a sanctuary for rescued farmed animals in High Falls, New York. Additionally, Maddie continues to advocate for animals and humans in labs through an organization she co-founded, Justify, which is a supportive space for animal lab workers that advocates for a world where science doesn't harm humans or animals. Maddie is also a plaintiff in 2 free speech lawsuits related to animal testing against the University of Wisconsin Madison and the National Institutes of Health, where she is represented by the Animal Legal Defense Fund. I cannot wait for you all to hear all of the things that Maddie and I discuss in this conversation. So without any further ado, I bring you my friend, Maddie Krasno. Welcome to the Animal Liberation Hour, Maddie. It's super exciting to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yay, absolutely. And people may already know I listen to a lot of podcasts, and that's actually how I first learned about you and your story and how you became an activist and advocate for the animals. So why don't we start there?
Yeah, so I would say that, like many people, I did grow up loving animals. But I think, my sort of journey into activism probably really started in college. So as an animal lover, I really kind of specifically fell in love with primates. I had looked up to Jane Goodall and wanted to work in primate conservation. I was a little intimidated by what was required to study the sciences. And so it took me a little bit to sort of get on the path of declaring zoology a major. But what ended up sort of prompting that was when I took a class that was all about non-human primates. It was an animal behavior course at the University of Wisconsin Madison. I believe they still offer the course, and it's a pretty beloved course where you just get to learn all about the different species, from prosimians to monkeys to chimps. And I remember there was a point where the professor had put a photo of one of his former students on the big screen with Jane Goodall. And I was just sitting there thinking to myself, like, why can't that be me? Knowing full well that, the reason it wasn't me was because I was terrified of chemistry and physics and all these things that, I had to apparently study to get myself a degree in zoology. So anyway, I ended up declaring that major the following fall. So this was the spring semester of my freshman year of college. But what was interesting about the class is that it was taught by the director of one of the primate labs at the school. And I don't remember a lot being talked about with regard to like the animal testing that was taking place. I really knew very little about animal testing at the time. But when I learned about, these primate labs on campus, I thought, well, this would be a really good way to set myself, ahead, so to speak, and get experience working with primates. And so I ended up applying to be a caretaker in the Harlow Primate Lab at the University of Wisconsin Madison. Technically, I was a student caretaker, so I got the job. I had a lot of years of nannying experience. I've been caregiving forever, so I was really, really excited. And that excitement quickly sort of dissipated, and a lot of mixed feelings set in once I kind of realized what was going on and what I was experiencing and what I was a part of. And so ultimately it was being in this environment, working for 2 years in a primate lab, that started to make me question the way we treat animals in our society, specifically primates. But partway through that, I ended up going vegetarian. One of my other courses sort of inspired me, but I didn't quite understand veganism at that point. I didn't know what was harmful about it quite yet. So I was vegetarian for about 2 years, and then eventually was told what's going on in the dairy industry and the egg industry, and was like, oh, that's bad. So that was, after I had already graduated and left. But that was definitely the beginning, I would say, of what is now like a decade of working in animal protection.
Wow. That's really fascinating that, how, and I think sometimes a lot of us do come into working in these professions that will entail working with animals because we're excited about them, we're curious about them, without really thinking about how they feel about it,
Right.
But
yeah.
Not to, before people are like, that's anthropomorphizing, like not necessarily do that, but like, yeah, like it's same with, zoos and stuff. It's like, yeah, but how are we going to show our kids what these animals look like? And it's like, we shouldn't feel entitled to have them at our beck and call. Like, if you really want to see them, like, go to their natural habitat and wait for them to show themselves to you. So, yeah, absolutely. I think that experience of, for you, having that idol of Dr. Jane Goodall and wanting to have the relationship she has with primates for yourself. And I think the fact that the one of the biggest primate research facilities is on campus, like, I don't know, I'm curious to know, like, were you familiar with the kinds of experiments that were happening there, or did you like, what was your assumption of the use of primates?
Honestly, I knew so little. I think I was, I mean, it's sort of ridiculous, but it's like, I don't know what I thought, but I definitely did not think that what I would be seeing and a part of would be as traumatizing as it was. And I think, I also bought into what a lot of people still buy into, which is that we need to do this research because it's important for, scientific progress with regard to human health. And without it, like, we will suffer. And it's just, humans, their lives matter more. And so on some level, I felt that this must be true. Even if it wasn't like, I believe this is true, it's like, well, a lot of people say this.
Yeah.
So I think it must be. Yeah. And, you know, when you're actually in there and every single day that you're there, you just watch these individuals sit in these barren cages. I mean, one of the things that I still think about is, you know, I was 20, 21, 22 when I was working in there. There were monkeys who were my age, sometimes even older. So they had spent their entire lives, whether it was in this facility or a different one, because I know that we were a breed, this facility would breed monkeys and then they would be shipped elsewhere. I don't, you know, and sometimes monkeys would come from elsewhere. So I can't say for sure which ones were there the whole time unless I had done a deep dive into records, which I didn't. But, you know, that's decades of sitting in barren cages, sometimes spending their lives alone. And most animals in research live and die in these facilities. And that also seems to be completely misunderstood. So it, you know, I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
Yeah. And that's such I don't know, there's something about that perspective of like, oh my gosh, these animals are the same age I am, right? Mm-hmm. It's quite bizarre because I think for the most part, a lot of people, you know, they work with mice and rats, and yes, it hits very differently. Not from like, oh, it's just mice and rats, it doesn't matter. But like when you are able to relate to someone being experimented on, being in that condition for as long as you've been alive, it's
right. Absolutely. It's kind of a whole other sort of level.
Yeah.
Of just, I don't know.
Yeah. And sometimes I also wonder, like, when these experimenters do say like, oh, we need this to cure, I don't know, some disease. And then I also wonder, like, okay, the people who do have these conditions, if they were to personally come and see this, I feel pretty confident in saying that they wouldn't want a treatment in this fashion. Like, we know that it's not the best way to get effective treatments for human health. Right. But also, like, I feel like they're in a position to say that, no, not in my name. And I think that is a very cool approach that folks in the animal protection space are using as well. Like, to contact people from these communities and say like, hey, this is happening. You're against it. You know, we would like for you to speak up and to be able to put pressure from that angle too.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think with that too, there's this misunderstanding as well that, you know, you sacrifice X number of animals and then voila, you get the cure. And it's just, that's not how this works. And yet it's what is continuously spewed by the industry or people supporting the industry. Yeah. This, like, you know, false notion that we're just getting all these life-saving cures. When that's not how this works. You're not choosing between the life of a monkey and curing this child's cancer. That's just, you know, simplifying a very complicated issue.
I know. Sometimes I'm like, aren't you scientists? Aren't you something
like, don't you know that that's just not how this works?
Yes, it's like, just even for myself personally working in the academic space, I was so confused a lot of the times when, you know, time would come to like statistics and data analysis and like planning the experiment. It's like trying to make it such that we're getting the data we want or the results that we want. And I was like, statistics even a thing? It sounds like we're just choosing what kind of analysis to do such that the results are significant.
You know, there's also the piece of like when your paycheck depends on it. Exactly. And the reality is that there is a lot of money in this industry and you get paid when you publish. And so, you know, there's this cycle of just continuing to funnel money into studies. A lot of times they're repeating stuff that's already happened that's, you know, in my opinion, completely unnecessary. but, over and over again. And then you get to publish, and then, you get more funding. And meanwhile, it's like, well, where is the cure? Why is it that these medications come out, but no one can afford them anyway? Meanwhile, there's all of these resources out there in the world that so many people need access to, can't afford, but we keep those inaccessible and unaffordable, like healthcare and health insurance and medications that already exist, and therapy. And so, it's just like, it makes my head spin, honestly, because it's, if I had $1 for every person, I've talked to or kind of communicated with in different circles, that's like, I wish I had access to therapy. I wish I could afford therapy.
Absolutely.
I mean, that should not be the case. Mm-hmm. This should not be like so inaccessible. And meanwhile, we have, labs like the one that, like those at the University of Wisconsin Madison, who are inducing extreme anxiety in female monkeys to study extreme anxiety in, females. Want to talk to me about what has helped me? Because actually it's having access to therapy, which my parents helped me with because I couldn't afford it. Oh, this is sounding like a pattern. Mm-hmm. Having access to medications because, yes, I needed some of those, and so it's just, it's hard to not look at the billions that are funneled into this industry and go like, is there a better use, like a better way we could spend this money to help humans, like to actually help humans?
Mm-hmm. Mic drop.
That'll be all.
Yeah. I guess, I really do like this conversation about your experience, mostly because it has been a huge part of all the work that you're doing right now. And, you've been courageous about speaking up and calling out your alma mater in ways that I know a lot of people might struggle with. So what was that like, to the process building up to that, and now, the work that you are doing, and what do you feel has been effective in getting people on board to at least, see this issue for what it is?
Yeah. It was a process, for sure. So I was at the lab for 2 years, and it ended because I graduated. So as a student caretaker, you move on. And I knew at that point that I wanted to work in the sanctuary world. I wanted to help animals that came from labs and came from other situations of abuse and exploitation. Mm-hmm. So I started to kind of learn about animal sanctuaries. Like I didn't, that wasn't common knowledge to me at this point. And just for context, this would have been like I graduated in 2013. So a decade ago. Okay. So, as I learned about, the sanctuary world, I was really interested in getting involved. And, so I ended up interning, working at different sanctuaries. And that kind of, was part of my journey of sort of opening up. I was at Black Beauty Ranch in Texas, which is, goodness, I think they have like over 1,400 acres, if I remember correctly. They have like hundreds of horses and donkeys. They had primates, so like lesser apes, monkeys, and even great apes. So I worked with 2 chimps when I was there. They also had like tigers from roadside zoos. They had farmed animals, bison. The property is so enormous. Yeah. They're so spaced out. It was an interesting place to be. Like especially at that point, like I was vegan, and I do understand the importance of having sanctuary for all these different animals. I mean, a huge issue in the United States is that we have more tigers in people's private, possession, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
than worldwide. And it's like, that's from roadside zoos and cub petting.
That's a statistic that I did not know, and I don't think many people do. That is
oh yeah, it's horrifying. And this is because, I mean, there's just like so little legislation that exists where like people can actually go online and be like, I want to buy a tiger cub. I mean, that's just like a thing. And so, Black Beauty Ranch was amazing because I learned about so many of the issues that I wasn't, like I had come from animal testing, but I started learning about the farmed animal space. I started learning about wildlife, like exploitation, roadside zoos, cub petting, swimming with dolphins, things like that. I started learning about, horse racing and issues regarding equine. So it was a really cool place to be. And I actually ended up spending a total of 1.5 years there because I interned in the primate department. And then I also did outreach and education with them. And got to that was like my first time like being a tour guide and educating the public. And I absolutely loved it. And it's what got me into humane education. Yeah. So that was all happening. But what was really amazing about my primate internship there is that I got to work with 2 chimps who had come from research. Their names were Lulu and Midge, and they have since passed away. But and when I say worked with them, we had there were very strict rules. This was a sanctuary where you're not interacting with you're not in with wild animals. Like there's very significant safety precautions. So I want to make that clear. Being able to care for them and provide for them and these other monkeys that had come from research definitely was sort of like a piece of the healing puzzle, being able to see some of these animals who had made it out, because as I said before, most don't. It is really unusual for animals to make it out of research. It's the exception, not the rule. And so, being able to see what it was like for them too, and knowing what they've been through, it's just, it just felt like one of those things that a step of sort of me trying to forgive myself in a way for some of, what I did and did not do when I was in the lab, when I was, too afraid to speak up, too afraid to question anything that was going on. So.
Yeah. And that's good, because I was going to ask, like, at any point, did you voice your concerns to anyone, or did you meet anybody who may have felt the same way as you did? And what kind of resources from, say, the animal protection space would you have found useful at that time for you to, feel like, okay, this is like, I'm getting paid to be here, but I don't like what I'm seeing. Mm-hmm. And I also want to feel safe, speaking about this.
Yeah. So yeah, at the time, during my time in the lab, I did not really speak up, question anything. I think my roommate for most of college had ideas that I wasn't, and she was like, she is and was like one of my closest friends. She was aware that I had issues with what was going on. And even my parents were too. But for the most part, I was pretty quiet about it. I did a really good job, yay me, of dissociating and kind of compartmentalizing that part of my life with, kind of what people would say is the normal college experience of going out, dating, studying, I was volunteering with, preschoolers, doing all these other things where I just was able to sort of compartmentalize. And there were a couple times, I specifically remember one time in college, there was a weekend where I had 2 newborn monkeys who had been rejected by their mothers, which is a relatively common thing because monkeys are social animals, and when they in the wild, they learn from each other how to take care of their babies. And in the lab, they're not able to have that same sort of group dynamic of learning. And oftentimes monkeys, when they have a baby for the first time, are young and might not know what they're doing, and they leave the baby at the bottom of the cage, and hopefully you get there in time, the baby's not dead. Or is that hopeful? I don't know. That's a whole other whole other tangent. There were these two different infants in one weekend who were in like these incubators where we would feed them by hand until we could match them with another mom. And one of them I came across I came across dead in the incubator. And that was one night. And then the second, I think that was Saturday. So then Sunday, one of them, I got to one of them and they were having a seizure, and I picked them up and they died in my hands. And I had gone home after that. And I specifically remember collapsing on my bed in tears and being on the phone with my mom. And I think that might have been one of the times that my mom, who didn't fully understand the trauma that was starting, was sort of, she was trying to comfort me. It wasn't like she was trying to say, do this, you have to. But it was you care about them so much, you're doing the best you can. Basically just trying to say, someone else might not care as much as you do. It's not bad that you are feeling this way.
Yeah.
In hindsight, she, after fast forwarding years and years and getting a PTSD diagnosis and seeing what happened, me actually be triggered and dissociate in public, she wishes she knew more and, could have helped me sooner. But it's hard because this industry is so celebrated and kind of held to such high esteem. And when you start to empathize with animals, people think you hate people, people as in humans. And that's
that you're anti-science.
Right. And it's no, I think that there's a point where some things aren't worth what we decided they were worth in the past.
One of the things that you did mention, about that your mom said, maybe someone else may not care as much. And I think that's very similar to a reason that I hear pretty often from former workers who worked in animal experimentation spaces, say that, well, if I leave, someone who doesn't even care about them is going to come. I can at least make whatever life they have, just an ounce better if I could.
Yeah.
Rather than someone who doesn't even care about them and they're just going to be neglected.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, as I started to speak out more and more and kind of identify as a former primate lab worker to the public world, criticism that I would receive was, well, how could you do that? And why did you stay? Why didn't you just leave? And that's
what people say to domestic violence victims too. Right. Should have just left. And so whenever people say that, I'm like, no, because again, I think a lot of the psychological games that we play are very similar, maybe not exactly the same.
Yeah.
But we say the same things. If you didn't like it, you could have just left.
Yes, I decided at a certain point that this isn't something that I agree with. Yeah. But there's also victims involved. And when you start viewing them as victims, and then it's well, if I walk away, who's the next person caring for them? Who's the next person showing them any ounce of compassion? And it's not to say that there were other caregivers who cared deeply for these animals. A lot of people who get involved in the caretaking side of things, they do so because they love these animals, and they may, just like me, not know or not realize what that actually means to work in these facilities. And so it's once again, it's too simple to say that it's just like, oh, you should have left.
Yeah.
You know, when and you had asked too before about, did I know anyone who felt the same way? And at the time, no. Years later, one of my coworkers, after seeing my outreach on social media, reached out to me and said that she had felt similarly. She cared so deeply for these animals that she was stressed about leaving, about graduating and having someone else taking care of them, not because of like, you know, really standing by this research, but because she cared for these animals and saw, you know, that what's going on is problematic. And so to just like dismiss people as sort of like, oh, you didn't just walk away. It's like, well, you know, I could have, and I would be a lot less traumatized.
Yeah.
I also wouldn't be able to talk about what I know, and to have gone on to do what I have done in terms of speaking out about what's going on at the University of Wisconsin Madison, what my experience was, and what I've come to sort of feel about this industry. And I think, you know, that, you know, it's not like I'm like, oh, yay, PTSD, because it has sucked. It has royally sucked. And we can go on to talk about this, but, you know, it became very clear that in the animal protection movement, there were very few voices from the inside that were really talking about what's going on the inside. And that's a real bummer, considering how many people actually work in labs at some point in their lives because of the sciences, because it's so normalized, even in veterinary sciences. So, you know, that's, I think it's important, despite, you know, the struggles that I've been through. And it's not, you know, it's not all over. But I've learned to manage. I used to hate going to sleep because I would close my eyes and I would go back in the lab. And all the time I'd be trying to take photos because I always like felt like so bad that I obeyed authority so much that I was too afraid to take a single photo. You know, like that's how obedient and just like kind of like authority knows best. That's who I was.
That
is not who I am anymore.
I would really like to talk more about, you know, how we can offer constructive criticism to the animal advocacy space too, to make it more welcoming and supportive of people who have previously worked in, you know, in industries like yourself or are currently working, and make them feel safe to come forward. There are, you know, whistleblower avenues that some people take, but I don't like, have you ever thought of ways outside of that and how that has, you know, maybe led to some exciting projects that you are working on?
Yeah, for sure. So along the way of my journey, as we get sidetracked here and there, fast forward after Black Beauty Ranch and, you know, a master's in humane education and kind of pursuing that side of things, I started taking to social media to talk about my experiences in the primate lab. And I started to, and that was like helping me because I felt like when I would hear from, you know, some close friends and stuff, and they would just be like, wow, I didn't know you were going through this, or like, wow, I had no idea. And the more I did this, the more sort of like people would come out of the woodwork. And fast forward a couple of years, like I started to have like former lab workers from across the country come in, like slide into my DMs and be like, I found you because of this post, or I feel so validated that, you know, you are saying what you're saying because I've been feeling this, but I didn't know anyone else was. And,
Amazing.
you know, I had felt pretty alone. One of the things that had really helped me, aside from having, humans that were supportive despite not ever, having the experience themselves, was coming across Dr. John Gluck, his book, which is Voracious Science and Vulnerable Animals, a primate science.
Yeah.
What?
It's an amazing book.
Yes, a primate scientist's ethical journey. And what was so amazing about that is he was a vivisector himself, like straight up animal researcher, and worked under Harry Harlow, the person who was behind the lab that I had worked in. Obviously, this was years before I was there, but reading his memoir, I felt so validated and understood and a little bit re-traumatized, but like in an okay way, because it was like, there is someone out there that feels how I do when it comes to this. And I hadn't found that. And so,
what inspired you to take to social media and start speaking up?
Yes. Because I'm like trying to think about the timeline, and because it was after that I started talking, and then I connected with, some other people who I kind of see as like mentors / friends. And they kind of supported me, and I ended up meeting Dr. Gluck. And that was like one of the most emotional experiences ever. He is like the most humble, soft-spoken person. He's one of those people where it's like, it's a bummer that he doesn't have the platform that he should. Like, he's so like, most people I would say in this movement have no idea who he is.
Most people who we think are worthy of having platforms,
don't have the platform. And that is what is really frustrating, because he has the background, he has the experience, he has the knowledge, he knows. And he also is just, relatable, because he went from, again, like relatable to the general public, in that he went from being completely in it to starting to see another side. And it was his students that started to like get him thinking differently.
Yes. And to have that, it was so refreshing to read about someone in a position that we would consider,
authority.
Like, and not have that ego and be, I think that's what science and academia is all about, is to be open and do things that are effective, and like have these conversations and not hold yourself to such a high standard. It was just so refreshing to read about that. And so I'm really not surprised that he is that kind of a person. You and I, we don't see the value of putting people on pedestals. We're not here to say that like some people should be, or just saying that we can all be hearing these voices, but like some people really aren't given that recognition they truly deserve.
I think part of it is, like, I don't know how much he's like trying to get it.
I don't think that exactly.
Which is fine, but I think it's not that I think if offered, he would. But I think that this movement tends to focus on, a lot of times who's yelling the loudest.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
And so we can miss out on elevating, uplifting some of these people who can really, change some minds and get people thinking differently. I'm trying to remember what he said. I remember I was telling him, this like still to this day gives me chills, because when I was sitting with him the day that I met him, and he was allowing me to just kind of like share some of my stories, like between tears. And I was talking to him about the monkey that I kind of call Cheerio, who is this individual. It was like a 1-ish year old macaque rhesus monkey who was having issues that we weren't really sure what was going on, but he was being kept in our infirmary where we could keep a closer watch and like, you know, keep track of what he was eating and so on. Ultimately, this monkey was disabled. I don't know why or what happened, but basically he like didn't have control of his arms and legs, so he couldn't really get around, but he was still like very much like, you know, there was so much life in his eyes. And when I would take these little like Cheerios and put them up to his mouth, which I wouldn't do with any like just any monkey, but you know, this monkey was very vulnerable and unable to feed himself. And so we were helping him, and he was just like, you could see, like, you could feel the gratitude. Mm-hmm. And you know, it was decided that they couldn't figure out what was going on with him. And of course, you know, as a disabled individual in this industry, you're just considered, you know, expendable. I mean, all of these individuals are, but especially in this situation. And so it was decided that he was going to be euthanized. And this was New Year's one year. So that was how I was spending New Year's. I was asked along with my coworker to assist the vet, which is sort of ridiculous, like looking back on it, because like this monkey could barely, you know, move his limbs. So it's not like he needed to be like secured, but we had carried him to this steel table where my coworker was holding down one leg and one arm, and the vet had the other leg, and I had one of the arms, and I was really just holding his hand. I mean, he wasn't even like it's not like he was really trying to move. He couldn't, I mean, maybe he was, but not, you know, he couldn't. And I was watching as the light faded from his eyes. And it was so deeply upsetting to me, because he had so much life in his eyes. And I knew like, you know, a sanctuary, this is where like sanctuaries come in. Sanctuaries don't see individuals as expendable. They would do everything they could to try to figure out what they could do to make this individual, to give this individual a life they deserve.
Yeah, like the best possible life.
Right. Yeah.
In their best interest.
Right. And so, but they, you know, they weren't going to bother. They weren't going to try to reach out and send this individual to sanctuary. So it's just like, it was just decided, like, you're done. And that, you know, that was heartbreaking. And so when I was telling him some of these stories, you know, and how like bad I felt, and his response, instead of like sort of, you know, some people would be like, well, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? Or maybe you should, you know, his response is like I'm sure that the compassion that you showed this animal was like clear to them, or like it was just like it wasn't, there was no sort of like accusation or like, what you could have done. It was like he still saw in me the good that I have trouble seeing sometimes because of what I was a part of. And that's who he is.
Wow. Yeah, I would highly recommend people check out his book. It's an amazing read. It's very, like you said, very relatable, even if you haven't been through that experience, but just seeing, you know,
it's easy to follow. Like, it's not like it's like scientifically done where you wouldn't like be able to understand what's going on. And honestly, I mean, he took such incredible like notes from everything he did that, it's brilliant.
Wow. Yeah, I hope to meet him one day for sure. Like a wonderful human being.
Yeah.
And I guess like there are, you know, people like that. And I just wonder how that could be incorporated within the animal protection space. And I would like to talk about your organization that you recently started. I know you have a full-time gig with Woodstock where you do humane education work.
Yeah, so I was like kind of doing humane education work.
Okay.
Now I'm more in development, actually.
Oh,
I
nice.
do grant writing, but I like to think of it still. I like to think of everything as humane education, because what are we doing if we're not, educating for a more just world?
Yeah.
But yes, I work for Woodstock Farm Sanctuary, so my day job is advocacy for farmed animals and creating a more vegan world. And then my side gig passion project was co-founding Justify with two other individuals. Mallory, who runs Save the Buns, a bunny rescue, check them out, as well as Lindsay, who actually did a lot of undercover work in animal labs. And so both of them have lab background. And the three of us kind of came together and saw this gap, saw this need for there to be a community that's not going to jump on people and judge them for their background in animal research.
Right.
And that's also not going to be like, yay, animal research rocks. We should just like do a cruel thing more humanely, whatever that means.
Yeah.
So that is how Justify was born. It took some time because we're all very busy with our day jobs. But it's a relatively new thing, and we are, on social media and kind of starting to like feel out what we're going to be offering, whether it's like, panels, doing a podcast, maybe like, just like one-on-one support for people who have either come out of a lab, maybe still in them. I mean, I've had people reach out both who are no longer in labs as well as individuals who are still in them. And the overarching response has been like, wow, I'm just so glad you exist, because I was having these feelings, but I don't know who to go to, because the reality is that when I started talking about this stuff, I had some really awful stuff said to me, and it was coming from animal rights activists. So if this isn't a safe space for people to come out of the industry to come to, then of course they're not going to talk. Of course they're not going to share what they know, and they're also going to walk away, with this bottled down like I did for so long. And I don't want that for people. This has huge mental health implications. Absolutely. So that is where Justify comes in. It's meant to be a resource that I wish I had when I was in the lab, when I came out of the lab. It's sort of like, to me, is what John Gluck was, like realizing there's someone else out there who feels, who might have feelings like I do. And it's just not common to find that with this industry, because the industry doesn't want you talking. They don't want you sharing that. I mean, we didn't even get into this, but I've got ongoing lawsuits, including one against my alma mater, because they were censoring me for speaking about my experiences through social media. Very powerful. And we also discovered that the University of Wisconsin Madison, along with like the National Institute of Health and some other universities, they use blocked word lists. So these are lists that like you can find them through FOIA requests, the Freedom of Information Act, where basically like you request what words will automatically like if you type something like on their Instagram and that word is on their list, then your comment is only visible to you and the person like running the account, but not to the public. And so basically what we discovered is that like the NIH and UW-Madison, they use blocked word lists that are made up almost entirely of words related to animal testing. So that if the public wants to question anything they are doing, it's like they think that they've spoken up, but no one hears it, no one sees it. And that to me is like such a free speech violation, such a violation of like when the NIH is behind so much of the funding that goes into this industry. This is government funding, it's taxpayer dollars, and we can't speak out about it. That is not ethical.
If you're open to talking about it, tell us about the lawsuit a little bit, like what the nature behind it was, the status, plans moving forward.
Yeah. So basically what was going on, as I said, is that there was censorship taking place. First, what happened was I was creating my own posts, and I would actually tag UW-Madison in the posts. And I quickly realized that they were untagging themselves, which as a public institution that gets, government funding, that isn't supposed to be happening. And it honestly, it just made me realize that what I had to say was viewed as problematic to them, was viewed as a threatening, not as I am threatening them, but threatening in the sense of this could impact how people view what is going on, in these animal labs. And I realized the power in my stories. And so I kept talking, and I also started commenting on some of their posts. One that comes to mind is they like to on Mother's Day or Father's Day, put out posts that are celebrating all the Badger moms. We're the Wisconsin Badgers.
They didn't really care about. Oh, maybe they care about actual Badgers. Just put
yeah, probably not. But anyway, I had commented on the post, and I was like, what about all of the, the moms the monkey moms in your research labs that, are being forced to have babies that are stolen from them? It's not a happy Mother's Day for them.
Yeah.
They would censor that. Mm-hmm. But so
are they deleting those posts, or were they doing the?
Some were deleted, some they would hide so that, I would see it, but the public wouldn't. So it just kind of varied, but it was clear that there was censorship taking place.
Okay.
And ultimately I went to, a friend at the Animal Legal Defense Fund and was just this is so weird. Look what's going on. Is this allowed? And he was like, this seems pretty questionable. Yeah. So the lawsuit was born.
Wonderful.
And it's, social media is a relatively new-ish means of communication. And so there are implications that could be huge for this, especially when you think of the blocked word list, because we found that the NIH and other universities are doing the same thing. If it was ruled that this is unconstitutional to block conversation like this, then that would open up conversation that people deserve to have because it's their tax dollars.
Yeah.
So right now, basically in both lawsuits, my lawsuit against the University of Wisconsin Madison, as well as a lawsuit that I am one of 3 plaintiffs on against the NIH, both were unfortunately ruled against me/us. And am I surprised? Well, no. Do I think it's wrong? Yes. Am I surprised? No, because this.
So what was the basis for dismissing the suit?
That there is argument that it's basically a debate of how public is this forum. It's a little complicated. What I will say is that if you want to hear more and hear from one of my lawyers who's talked about it much better than I do, the hen house, our hen house, hosted me and my lawyer, where we talk all about the Wisconsin.
I did listen to that. Yeah. We'll be sure to link that in.
Right. So that definitely does a deep dive into that lawsuit and will help kind of lighten that. But at that point,
it was the animal law podcast, or
it was the animal law part of our hen house.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I can't even remember if that was during when we had appealed or not yet. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we have appealed the ruling.
Yeah.
So what that means is we're hoping to fight it. And, that we'll see. As I said, unfortunately, this industry is really powerful. And sometimes what seems really clear cut isn't when people are powerful, and there's a lot of money behind it. And I think most listeners can probably understand that because that's just the way our society works. So yeah, it's kind of a TBD type situation, but regardless of what happens, it's not going to stop me from continuing to do what I'm doing, sharing about my experiences, trying to help others who feel like they need to find others like them, help people come out of the woodwork, so to speak, and feel supported. Even if they're not like completely aligned, like a lot of the people that I talk to, they're not like, I am an animal rights activist. I believe in animal liberation. I want to see a world that is based on collective liberation, collective justice for all. Not everyone is on, like aligned in that. Like everyone starts on their own journey, and especially when it comes to justify, people are at very different points. They might even say like, I'm not against animal testing. I'm just, questioning some stuff. And like that's fine. And I hope that, that also doesn't deter people knowing who I am or knowing who the other co-founders are. But we're also not going to like hide who we are because I wasn't an animal activist. I wouldn't even say like, I feel like it would have been like only in the past couple of years that I would even say I am an animal rights activist because, there's this connotation with it.
Oh, yeah. That was me when I first went.
Yeah. It's similar to speaking up about animal testing in the sense that it's like, oh, so you hate humans, like, oh, you don't like science, you don't like progress. It's like, no, I can actually be really supportive of human rights and social justice and still not think that animal research is what we should be. You could reverse this and say like, oh, you think that we should be putting billions into like this instead of like helping people access healthcare and have shelter and clean water. Yeah. Like to me, that's like something that immediately could change people's lives. But,
here we are.
We're keeping the money from them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And putting it into something that has, the outcome is it's not showing many results. So
exactly. Yeah, it's clear. We know that if you even people in the animal experimentation space, it's fascinating. If you like look at a lot of these publications, they start off by saying this one gene is the same in this worm and in the human, so we're going to study Alzheimer's.
Right. It's like, okay, but so here's the thing. We aren't worms.
Then they end the paper with
by saying so there is the caveat.
So future studies needed. And I was like, you made me read this boring paper for so long, only to say that we're not worms.
Yeah, it's like I actually could have told you that.
Yeah,
but like yeah. It's just I think it's just about what we're prioritizing, and honestly, the humans that we want to help. Like why aren't we doing more for these other populations that like there is stuff we could do right away? Again,
healthcare, like you said. Like
water,
access to getting, like chemo is not it's not cheap. Like if you want to cure cancer, like okay, like let's also look into like increasing accessibility, but also looking at effective animal-free therapy and like funneling money towards that. Absolutely.
It's like, I mean, honestly, like I think one of the most depressing things these days is seeing what people have to use a GoFundMe for. Oh, it's criminal. I mean, it's like you should not need to fundraise, for a couple hospital bills. Like it's just And yet, again, all of this money to kill these animals in a lab and publish a paper,
these so-called treatments, like you said, first off, they're not flying off the shelves anytime soon. And
probably won't be accessible anyway, even if they occur.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I need now what, like a GoFundMe to get this? Or it's like, do I have to sell the kidney to save my other kidney? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of what takes place is because people aren't living in, they don't have the things they need. And then it leads to these other issues that they need, treatment for. I mean, it's just like,
again, and all of these issues are connected.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I care about the animals, but look at all the people who are also being affected by, they're also being oppressed in a very different way. They're being exploited in a very different way. We're not saying, not equating one or the other, but we fix one and like you are going to see a tangential effect. And
of course,
and I think in a way that can give us some optimism when it comes to like, when we're doing this education to speak about how all of this is connected. And if we stop using and exploiting these animals and do things that actually work, people are going to benefit too.
Right. And I mean, what I think it really comes down to is reconnecting with each other in nature in a way that is not about dominating it.
Yep. I always really like I know it's a very simple phrase, but here with us, not for us phrase.
Right.
It's just such a simple way to put it. It's just, And I think there was something that I did want to touch on briefly when it comes to how people in the animal experiment space try to, convince themselves that, okay, like it's not all bad. And something that I've had a former, like a grad student colleague of mine tell me was, I just try to tell myself that, they were born for this purpose because, they're bred into existence for this purpose and they have, fulfilled their purpose. So that's kind of how they are like alleviating or like trying to justify what they're doing.
Now you know why we called it Justify.
I know exactly. Yeah. So, and I don't know what my question is here necessarily, but like, have you had such people like saying things like that, and how do you respond to comments like that? I know I feel like we're all gaining experiences on dealing with social media. Who want to write, like you said, don't have time to watch a quick documentary, but have all the time in the world to like write a novel on our comment sections. Oh yeah, like just ways to effectively handle that without.
Yeah. I mean, I guess. Yeah. First of all, I would say it depends on what sort of the behavior is or how you're being spoken to. If someone really is like, open to conversing, I'm open to conversing. But I also, regardless, even if they're not, even if it's a perfectly fine question or comment, one thing I say, I think it's important for myself and just for anyone is that boundaries are okay and you don't have to respond to everything. You don't have to be expected to sort of, be the person that drops everything all the time to try to address every single thing, because it is exhausting and you also feel like you're repeating yourself a lot.
Yes. I think we also, because we care a lot about the animals, we feel like we're doing them a disservice if we
like if we do anything that like
if we like stop
care of ourselves.
Yeah, like we're like, it's gonna seem like, that this other person is in the right and the animals are losing out because I'm not exhausting myself engaging with this person.
Right. And one thing I will say too to that is that like, if it gets to a point where you're like, okay, this isn't going anywhere, like I'm going to stop engaging. that doesn't mean that what took place isn't important, because other people are reading these exchanges. They're always reading these comments, even if they don't say anything. I would say a lot of the times the people who are impacted by it aren't going to say anything, right? They're going to just be like, oh, and walk away. And then a year later come to you and be like, hey, guess what? You said this one thing this one time, and now I've radically changed. It's happened. I mean, I'm like, what? Where did you come from? I didn't even know you were looking at my stuff. So that, it's none of it is for nothing. And it's also okay to set these boundaries. And then when I would say, like, when it comes to, talking with the research community, if you are like in conversation with them, or even if they're going to comment and say something like what you said, where it's like, they were born for this purpose, this is whatever, this is what I'm telling myself, the one of the things that might make sense in that moment is saying, yeah, I tried to tell myself that too. And for me, it just became a thing where I really started to believe that we don't have a right to someone else's body. Everyone has a right to their bodily autonomy, and that's where I'm at. And like, it doesn't have to be a back and forth, because sometimes people they need to say what they need to say and sit with it. Like, I did not feel the way I felt a decade ago. And it's not to say that I had issues with it. That's not, but I didn't know how to formulate my feelings. And I was also, I was gaslighting myself, honestly. Like, maybe you just don't know what's going on, or maybe it's, like, you're wrong, or maybe what you're feeling is like, it's still worth doing whatever we're doing to them, like all of these things. And it's like, no, actually, your experiences are valid. And learning to accept that, and also accept that others' experiences are valid too. And trying more to help them open up and think instead of like shut down. Because the right thing in that moment isn't to be like, well, you're wrong, they're not bred into existence for us. It's like, they know how we feel. What would be helpful is to, think about, like, what are they saying? And what they're saying is, this helps me to cope with what I was doing.
Yeah.
And, don't get me wrong, there's some people who are going to stand by that for the rest of their lives. But some, they might look like they're going to, and then a couple years later, you're going to be very surprised.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just things don't always happen overnight.
You're going to be applying for jobs at a sanctuary. You never know. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I guess that does lead into another last quick question, or the last couple quick questions, of what, because the animal experimentation industry, huge industry, and they have a very strong narrative about activists, and people who work in this space have been, I would say, indoctrinated to be afraid of activists, to that, like, and how can the animal advocacy community effectively break through that narrative in an effective way? Because it, if the visual is like, oh yeah, megaphones, or like protest, which personally I love taking my megaphone. I love doing these. I also feel like there are certain audiences that it might not work well with. So yeah, what is an effective way to break through that, in a way that people who are, working in the capacity that you did work would actually question what they're being told? And
yeah, I mean, this is probably, I guess, okay, so obviously it depends on, like,
I'm not saying that you are going to give us the answer, but
no, I know. I guess it, like, depends on context, right? Like, yes. Like, am I in front of people who are literally coming out of a lab, like, versus, like, are we trying to reach them through social media? So I guess my point here is, like, if you're, in general, I think one of the most effective things you can do is be a compassionate and kind person. And I know that sounds really like ridiculous.
It's so boring.
I know. But like the reality is that, you know, animal activists have, you know, this reputation of only caring about animals, not caring about humans, or even think animals are superior.
Yeah.
That like, you know, we don't actually care about humans or helping humans in any way. It's only about, you know, having animals be free and whatever, that whole thing. And so I guess my point is, even if I didn't know someone was an animal activist, like if they had just said like, how do you feel about what you're doing? Like I genuinely wonder, like if someone just like asked me that, like what would have changed and if I would have been out of there sooner. Because it's really different when you pose things as questions and have a conversation versus like, well, did you know that all of the animals are killed? And they're going to be like, well, yeah, I work in here. And then they're going to like, their defenses are going to go up even if they have an issue with that. Because who doesn't have an issue with that? I think anyone would say, yeah, it sucks that they all have to die, right? But that's just how it is. You know, like that's what's going to come out, and that's not going to be productive. Right. So I think like there's a tendency in the animal rights movement to demonize workers, even if they're former workers. And I think it's incredibly unproductive. I actually think that it would be a lot more productive to humanize them. And I say that like, you know, hating this whole difference between like humanizing and not humanizing. But I mean it in the sense of like, don't demon, can you relate to this person on some level? Like, can you try to talk to them like they're just a stranger you don't know anything about? And I don't know, just like try to relate to them on some level, because people want to talk to and be around people who don't outright judge them. Understanding that a lot of people do get into this. Some get into it because they love animals and don't realize what's going on. Others get into this because they want to help humans and they really believe that this is what's going to do it.
Yeah.
And, you know, and some are going to keep believing that until, you know, forever. And that's fine. But some aren't. And, you know, if we just dismiss everyone in a lab who like as like a lost cause, and we point the finger at them as you're the bad guy, you're the problem, then we are just doing exactly what the industry wants, which is making us look completely unreasonable, us being animal activists, and helping that industry
flourish.
Actually be able to say, yeah, like what we said about them is true. And, you know, we get to stay in power because they're just going to point their finger at someone instead of trying to tackle the industry. And that's why I focus so much on this need to redirect funds, you know, because that's going at the industry. That's going at the power of the industry. It's, you know, it's fine. Call out a researcher who's doing some heinous, you know, study that's egregious, but there's so much research going on. Like just this one study, it's great to end it. But if we really want to get at this industry, we need to debunk this idea that like they're just, you know, doing all of these amazing things, coming up with all of these findings, and like all of these humans are benefiting. Like people need to start to realize what those funds could do elsewhere, because that I think is what's going to shift. And part of all of this is helping people who are in labs right now, or even were in labs, feel comfortable speaking out and sharing what they know. Because every time someone has actually come to me and shared what they know, every time, even if they're, again, not on the exact same page as me, they're like, this is messed up, you know, like, and so, but the industry doesn't want us empowering them. So animal activists should actually be like, oh, wait, we should be empowering them. not demonizing them. So I think that's like my roundabout way of just being like, stop demonizing workers and start trying to create an environment where they don't look at you as a threat. And, you know, even if they're not on the same page as you, because they're not going to be, but like, you know, it's just goodness sakes, be kind.
Yes, that's
Be kind.
That is all we ask. So since this is the animal activism mentorship, I'd like to know what kind of mentor do you aspire to be? And like mentors who have inspired you. You did mention Dr. John Gluck and Jane Goodall.
I've always kind of like looked to what helps me, being someone that people feel like they can come talk to, that isn't going to judge them for whatever they've done. I mean, and it, you know, I say all this because I know a lot of people are like it's, you are so angry when you hear and see some of what takes place in this industry. And I want to point this out because it makes me so angry too. But that I'm not, you know, I don't see it as productive to take that anger out on these individuals at this point. That's not what I see as getting us to the end of this industry. So all that being said, I want to be someone that people can talk to, and I want to be someone that helps others feel empowered. And like the people who have been, you know, the mentors to me that have had the most impact, like shout out to Katie Jarl Coyle, who now works for Austin Pets Alive, but I met like, I don't know, back in my Black Beauty Ranch days. And Katie is like a good friend, and also just like, I always just felt like she was like taking me under her wing to sort of like help empower me to do whatever it felt was right for animals. And likewise, like my former supervisor, Samantha Ragsdale, like I felt empowered by her. I felt that I could always go to her and ask questions and be honest about, you know, what's going on and, you know, how I felt about something. And I felt like she was always trying to find an opportunity to help me do better and help me, you know, succeed. And so that's what I then took to, you know, when I was in sort of like a supervisor type position, or just in general, when I, you know, speak with others, is I want them to walk away feeling supported and feeling heard.
Yeah. That's a beautiful answer. I love that. And I usually like to end these conversations with this one question, which is, how do you envision a just and equitable vegan world?
I think my simple answer to that would be doing our best to live in a way where we are not acting as though we have access to, or like the right to, someone else's body. Like that's, I mean, to completely simplify things, we do not have a right to someone else's body, human or non-human. And I think if we tried our best to live that way, in a way that is truly respecting nature, other life,
yeah,
we would see a more just world. We would see ourselves. I mean, it's, yeah, I think we just got to break down this hierarchy that humans have created.
And we put ourselves on top.
Right. And again, I say this not because I hate humans.
Yes.
I actually care deeply for a lot of humans, and I want to see their lives be full of joy and health. And I want to see that for the people I deeply know and for the people I don't know. And right now I see a lot that is not good. These hierarchies are what keep us living this way, where we're exploiting other people, we're exploiting bodies, whether they're human or non-human.
Yeah.
So maybe that answered that question.
I think that's a reasonable answer, because it's just like,
and it's something that I, the past few years have been like rethinking how I talk about this, like, oh, I'm an animal lover or I love all animals. And it's like, you know what? I actually don't, because to me, love is a very strong word. I love Hallie, my dog. I love Ginger, the cat. I have taken care of people's dogs who I definitely do not love or like. I will say that, cancel me, will. I find some, like, I mean, there are some people, like,
Yeah.
I find some people annoying. I find some other animals annoying. I'm terrified of lizards. I
But
don't.
that doesn't mean that you're like, oh, you deserve harm.
Exactly.
or
But
that
I
you deserve
respect.
to
I
be
think
exploited.
so. I'm
Like,
feeling so exactly. So I'm like, you don't need to love all animals.
no.
You should, but I do think we should respect their right to exist free from harm at their own, and not project our idea of intelligence and worth onto
Oh,
them. They do not need to launch the next NASA space mission to be considered smart.
Why do we get to say that our perspective is so intelligent when, like, here we are destroying the only planet that yes, we are very intelligent, and also we can be very not intelligent, and a fish is intelligent for its own reasons, and a dog is intelligent for its own reasons, and intelligence doesn't really matter because ultimately we all just should be able to live in a way where we are not being hard.
Exploited, used for anything to serve someone else's
Right.
benefit, whatever.
Mm-hmm. And that's, I get that that's idealistic. We live in an imperfect world, but, we can strive for things. We can do better. That's why I'm calling this industry out.
Thank you so much for taking the time. Clearly, we have talked about a lot of great things. I hope folks are feeling inspired. Thank you again for taking the time. I really appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. Thanks for having me.
I know there's a lot that we talked about in this episode, but I hope that Maddie's experiences and insights gives us all something to think about. And if the work that she does with Justify resonates with you, please check out our show notes for more information on how you can get involved. We will also link to Maddie's interview on Our Hen House's Animal Law podcast, where she discusses her lawsuit with the University of Wisconsin Madison in more detail. And if you're curious about Dr. John Gluck's remarkable book, Voracious Science and Vulnerable Animals, we will link that in the show notes as well so you can get your hands on a copy. Please take a quick minute to rate and review the podcast. It helps others find it more easily, and the more people that find it, the more people can be inspired by the guests we have on our show and turn that into actionable change for the animals. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. Our channel has educational workshops, talks, and so much inspiring and informative content that you do not want to miss out on. At AAM, it's important to us to offer our content and resources for free so that it is accessible to everybody. If you like the podcast and all that AAM has to offer and are able to support us, please consider a one-time donation or becoming a monthly patron. It helps keep us going. To make a donation, you can use our Linktree, which you can find in our show notes. You can also keep up with AAM on social media, visit our bookshop, our merch store, and keep up with all the fun things that we have going on. One more reminder that you can sign up for a free mentor to help and guide you through your activism journey. Just go to our website, animalactivismmentorship.com. So if you needed a sign that you should be an activist for the animals, here you go. Now remember that it will take all of us to come together and collaborate to achieve animal liberation. So stay focused, be courageous, be perseverant, and keep doing your part. And most importantly, take care of yourselves. Until next time.